At the far edge of a small American town, where the paved road gave way to gravel and the gravel gave way to dust, there lived an old farmer who kept to himself. No one knew exactly how old he was, and no one really asked. What people did know was this: every single morning, before the sun had fully decided to rise, he was already out there, working his fields, repairing broken tools with wire and patience, living in a house that hadn't been repainted in 20 years. His name was Harold. And Harold had a routine that never changed. While the world around him shifted and expanded and chased every new opportunity, Harold stayed exactly where he was. Same land, same method, same quiet discipline. The younger farmers thought he was stubborn, the older ones thought he was afraid. And the bank manager in town, a sharp-dressed man named Crest, had long written Harold off as a relic. Someone too set in his ways to recognize the future standing right in front of him. But Harold wasn't afraid, and he wasn't stubborn, he was watching. For 2 full years, the weather across the region had been almost impossibly perfect. Rain came on schedule, the sun held steady, pests stayed away, and corn production climbed to numbers that older farmers said they'd never seen in their lifetimes. Then came the ethanol plant. A large financial institution finished construction just outside of town and immediately began buying corn at prices well above the going market rate. Not a little above, significantly above. Word spread the way fire spreads in dry grass. Within days, the entire community transformed. Cafes that used to talk about weather and football were now buzzing with loan figures and expansion plans. Families who had farmed modestly for generations suddenly started dreaming on a much bigger scale. They went to the bank. They took out loans. They bought land they couldn't afford. They invested in machines they had never needed before. And the bank, specifically Mr. Crest, was more than happy to accommodate every single one of them. At the peak of this excitement, there was one man who was not buying land. One man who was not at the bank. One man who, when asked about his plans for expansion, simply paused and then said nothing. Harold. While everyone else sold everything they had to the ethanol plant and reinvested the profits into getting bigger, Harold did the opposite. He stored. Not just a little, not just what common sense would suggest. He stored everything. Bag after bag of corn was carried into his barns, neatly stacked, organized, labeled. By the time the second harvest came, his barns were completely full, floor to ceiling, wall to wall. And still, he needed more space. That's when the abandoned warehouse went up for auction. The building sat on the edge of town, an ugly, leaking, forgotten structure that nobody had paid attention to in years. Most people walked past it and saw nothing. Harold walked past it and saw exactly what he needed. He showed up to the auction. And that's when things got strange. The bidding started low, the way you'd expect for a broken-down building worth maybe $1,000. But the moment Harold raised his hand, something shifted. Someone else raised higher. Harold raised again, someone countered immediately. It didn't take long for the people in the room to realize what was happening. This wasn't a real auction anymore. This was a message. Someone, and most eyes quietly drifted toward Mr. Crest's direction, wanted Harold to back down. The price climbed past 5,000, past 7. Then $10,000 for a building that wasn't worth one. The crowd grew uncomfortable. Even people who had laughed at Harold's ways for years felt a strange unease watching this unfold. But Harold didn't flinch. He reached into everything he had saved over decades and placed his final bid. The hammer came down, and the warehouse was his. What happened next confused people even more. He didn't celebrate. He didn't even seem relieved. He simply went to work. For weeks, people drove past and watched him on the roof patching holes. They watched him reinforce the walls, replace the rotting doors, check every corner of that old structure until it stopped being a ruin and started being something solid. Then the delivery trucks started coming, canned food, bottled water, household tools, processed grains, bag after bag, box after box, all going into the warehouse. People shook their heads. The town's opinion of Harold had never been lower. Here was a man who, at the height of a historic economic boom, had chosen to spend his savings on a broken building and fill it with supplies that everyone assumed would never be needed. He's lost it, they said. Too old to see opportunity, they said, even Mr. Crest said it openly, in meetings with his clients, in the bank lobby, over coffee with business partners. Old people fear change, they miss what's right in front of them, they get left behind. Harold heard none of it, or if he did, he gave no sign. He simply kept working. Inside the warehouse, he had quietly installed something else. Machines for drying and grinding and processing corn. Every day, fresh batches were being turned into long-lasting grain products and carefully sealed away. He was not preparing for this season. He was preparing for a season that hadn't arrived yet. The new planting season came, and with it, another wave of expansion. Encouraged by 2 record years and a hungry ethanol plant, farmers planted on a scale they had never attempted. They rented more land. They borrowed more money. They bet everything, absolutely everything, on the assumption that the good years would keep coming. Harold's field stayed empty. He didn't plant a single row. When people noticed, the whispers turned to open laughter, giving up a profitable season, choosing to process old corn instead of growing new. What kind of farmer was he? But Harold had noticed something that the others hadn't taken time to see. The soil was tired, the water table was shifting, and the weather, if you knew what to look for, had been showing small but unmistakable signs for months. He couldn't tell you exactly when the storm would arrive, but he knew it was coming. 1 month into the new season, the rain stopped, not briefly, not temporarily. It stopped the way sleep stops when a nightmare begins. A heat wave settled over the region with no intention of leaving. Irrigation canals ran low, then lower, then dry. The soil cracked open like it was trying to breathe. Fields that had been green just weeks earlier turned yellow, then brown, then brittle. The crops didn't fail slowly. They failed all at once. Farmers who had borrowed against their land to fund record-scale operations stood in their fields and watched everything they'd invested simply disappear. And then the reality hit. All the corn from the previous harvest, every last bushel, had been sold to the ethanol plant. The profits had gone into loans and land and machines. There were no reserves, no backup, no cushion of any kind. For the first time in 2 years, the entire region had nothing left to fall back on. Food prices started climbing, then surging. Stores began rationing. The bank, which had been so eager to lend when times were good, reappeared now with higher interest rates and stricter terms, and the only collateral available was the land people had already borrowed against. Families who had been celebrating their success just months earlier were now quietly terrified. And in that fear, a single thought began to surface: the warehouse, the old man's warehouse. They came in small groups at first, then larger ones, people who had laughed the loudest, people who had shaken their heads at every delivery truck, people who had taken Mr. Crest's side in every conversation about Harold's outdated thinking. They walked to the edge of town with no certainty about what they would find. Some feared he would turn them away and he'd have every right. Others feared he would do exactly what the bank had done: exploit the moment, raise the prices, take whatever he could. When the warehouse doors opened, they stopped. Inside were mountains of neatly stored corn, hundreds of bags of processed grain, organized shelves of canned food, clean water, household essentials. Enough to carry a community for months. No one spoke for a moment. Then Harold stepped forward and told them his one rule: each family receives only what they truly need, no more, no less, and his prices exactly what they were before the drought. For families who couldn't pay at all, he allowed them to take what they needed on credit and settle the debt after the season recovered. He did not give a speech. He did not remind anyone of what they had said about him. He simply started helping people carry their supplies to their vehicles, one family at a time. This is where part 1 ends, but the story is far from over, because one question was now burning through the entire community. How did he know? How did one man, dismissed as stubborn, mocked as outdated, pressured out of every normal economic decision, end up being the only person standing between an entire town and complete collapse? The answer would change the way people thought about preparation, prosperity, and the danger of easy years. That story, Harold's full history, and the lesson he never stopped living, continues in part 2.